Eric Sheets-Haber and Mark Scalato, MSL. You know him through our Discord channel. And we've got Jordan, the head coach over at SaberSim. We are going to be talking through how to better use the SaberSim product, ways we can use it to help in MLB especially. And we're going to talk about why we sort of joined up with these guys. And I'm going to start it off with Sheets and just sort of the guy who on our side has used SaberSim for the longest, has found a lot of different advantages, has won a lot of tournaments in sports that I didn't even know existed. Sheets, why don't you talk a little bit about just what got us interested in working with SaberSim and sort of how it all came to be, and then we'll get into Jordan taking us through the product.
Well, first of all, I know Andy from back from poker. He's the CEO of SaberSim, and it was kind of coincidental that I kind of stumbled across SaberSim at the same time I kind of reconnected with Andy. I guess I'm even not relatively new to DFS anymore. I consider myself relatively new to DFS still for some reason. But when I first got involved in playing DFS, I was very, very interested in how lineups go together, how you don't want to just pick individual plays, how you build lineups, how you build for upside and things like that. It's very, very interesting to me back from my background. I mean, I run a hedge fund, and I think about the same things when I think about stocks. And it's not just which stocks look good in and of themselves, it's how they kind of go together when you're building portfolios. And when I first got involved in DFS, my natural thing was to be drawn to this whole idea of an optimizer, okay, you have projections, you have what each individual person you think is going to perform. What's the most optimal way to put lineups together like that? So naturally, the first types of optimizers I kind of were drawn to were ones that just created what they call an optimal lineup. You put the projection in, and the coding of it is incredible, the way that it can do it for you, and it creates based on the parameters that you put in what lineups are considered optimal, what based on those inputs are going to give you the most median points, and they kind of list them that way. And something about it, that whole idea just kind of didn't sit well with me, because quite honestly, if I'm playing GPPs, if I'm playing tournaments, I don't want the median. In other words, if you locked me in at the median every day, I would never win a tournament. I mean, literally ever. And I felt as though, and this is going to sound salesy, but there's got to be another way. You'd have to feel there's another way to present this to account for upside and for ceiling and things like that. And yeah, with the traditional optimizers, you can do settings. I mean, you could say, okay, I want X amount of randomness and things like that, and you can do like zillions of different things to make that work. But I keep saying this to the users, and I keep saying this to people in our site. All an optimizer is, and all any computer program is something that does what you tell it to do. In other words, you tell it to do something, and then it's going to do it for you. So if you go to an optimizer and say, give me the best median lineups, it's just going to do it for you. And you have to know what each optimizer is doing when you tell it to do something. And I think that's something that's kind of lost. So when I ran into SaberSim, it was really interesting to me that they factored in all the stuff that you would have to put into an optimizer to get it to do what you really want it to do, which is to figure out correlations, to figure out which guys go with one another, and then to figure out what is not going to happen, most of the time. I want to know what's going to happen, when I win. You know what I mean? I want to know what's going to give me enough juice that if it should happen to come to pass, it would win. And when I ran into SaberSim, it was literally the only optimizer. I don't even like to call it an optimizer. I call it kind of like a smart randomizer. Okay, but it was the only optimizer that even approached doing what I was envisioning an optimizer to do. Now again, SaberSim, in my opinion, isn't perfect, and there's no optimizer that's perfect, because if it were, then everybody would use it and the game would be over, right? But I think that, and I thought that SaberSim at least came the closest to at least approach what I was looking for, and to this day, it's still the only one that does it, right? So that's why I really, really early adopted SaberSim as my, I don't want to say optimizer or randomizer, whatever, my software of choice to deal with that part of DFS. That meaning, building lineups that actually have a shot to win, as opposed to lineups that are just going to produce median outcomes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Jordan, I want to turn it over, and we'll probably use your screen share if that's okay with you, and just we'll show you real quickly how to get into SaberSim through our site, and it should be pretty straightforward. So let me turn this on right here, and there we go.
Perfect.
And
cool.
Yeah, you can see it in the upper left corner right there is a SaberSim for anybody who has a membership with us through SaberSim. It'll pop right on there. And then if we go ahead and click in there, Jordan, I think you can take it away and talk a little bit about this stuff.
Yeah, we'll let this load up. Sheets took a lot of the words right out of my mouth. That was very, very well explained here. And I mean, I think down to the idea that it's not really just a lineup optimizer is perfect. It's really kind of it's a simulator and an optimizer and a lineup builder here. And a lot of what we are able to do in terms of building lineups built for upside is because we have these play-by-play game simulations of every single game on the slate. So that's kind of where everything starts with SaberSim. And that's really what's very unique about SaberSim. One thing I was just going to mention here, I think right off the bat, when you first load this, we'll pull up the SaberSim window. We'll talk a little bit about what we're seeing here. But one thing that I think can help just for the visuals, if you click this help button here and then toggle the full screen on, you can get this nice big full screen view, which is pretty cool here. But let's talk about what we're looking at here. And I'm just going to go ahead and start and explain the simulations we have available here by clicking into a batter. We'll click on Mike Trout's name here. And what that's actually going to do, this is going to pull up a full range of outcomes for what we expect the outcomes for Mike Trout's performance on the game tonight to be. The way we are generating these is with the game simulation. So what we literally do is we'll start simulating a game. The leadoff batter comes up to the plate. He's facing the starting pitcher. And we take into account an understanding of how skilled that starting pitcher is, how skilled that batter is, all of the sabermetric information that's important, like park factors and weather and things like that. Come up with different probabilities of a different event happening in that at bat, strikeout, walk, single, double, triple, home run, and out, and move on to the next batter. And that next batter's simulation, his probability of success or lack thereof against the pitcher is actually contextualized against what came before it. We are actually simulating the game out play by play, keeping track of things like, who's on base, how's the pitcher doing, how's the bullpen being used in the game. And it allows us to come up with these full ranges of outcomes for all of these players in the game. So, I mean, Sheets, you nailed it, right? We've got this average projection here, 12.67 points, that we can see for Trout in particular isn't even actually one of his most likely outcomes. And it's certainly not the outcome that would help you if you were trying to win a GPP with Mike Trout in your lineup. So we built SaberSim, one, to kind of come up with all of these different complicated ranges of outcomes for players, and then also build a lineup optimizer on top of it, really, that pulls this information in automatically. The one other thing that you'll get that's very important for baseball here out of these simulations is this correlation data. I think people have generally a pretty sound understanding here now in the DFS space in 2022 that correlation is important in baseball, but nobody can really quantify exactly how players are correlated, how much a player that is batting next to somebody in the order is correlated to somebody that's batting at the end of the order, how different correlations matter for different types of batters, or how this should be taken into account in different size slates and contests. And SaberSim handles a lot of that automatically for you. So we'll go ahead and start jumping in shortly here into the actual steps of building lineups with SaberSim. But I kind of wanted to set the stage first there, because when you first hit the app, you see a lot of data, first of all, but you see relatively familiar things. You've got the players, you've got projections, and you've got ownership. And I just wanted to set the stage by explaining, there's a lot actually more going on behind the scenes. Before I kind of jump into talking about what the actual lineup building process looks like here, do any of you guys have any questions for me or anything that you want to add on to that?
It mostly makes sense to me. Mark, did you have something over there, Mark?
Yeah, I've got a couple things just pop in because these are questions we get regularly, right? So
yeah.
Our version of SaberSim is part of what you guys call your partner program. So people often ask us, hey, I could just go to SaberSim.com and use my TrueDFS login. And I continually tell people no. I just wanted to iterate that here as well with you on the line. So you have to come use the version of the site that we have. We have single sign-on set up between us and SaberSim. We check your credentials. We know that you have a membership. This is where you have to go. Also, there's advantages of using our partner version of SaberSim. There's columns on the screen, which Jordan will probably cover in the near term, that you don't get when you you go to public SaberSim, and that's part of the package deal that we bring together with TrueDFS and SaberSim. So let's make sure we cover those items as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We do have a comment from K9, Bronco K9. What's up, buddy? He said he's been using, he loves SaberSim. He's been using it over a year. And he was asking about if there was something to change with the sliders. But he also said that never mind. He found the manual mode. Do you want to talk just to that a little bit? Because I don't know as much about that.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and address that real quick. So we did make an adjustment here, and this is in step 2. So this comes up after you click the Build Lineups button. Talk about this more here in a minute. I guess the most important thing to do in step 2 is select your contest. That's why it has this heading here. We will basically adjust our settings accordingly for things like correlation and ownership and variance based on the contest that you tell us you're playing. The sliders themselves now will hide when manual mode is turned off, mostly just because we think the most important thing for people to be doing here is to just tell us what contests they're playing. But you can still access these sliders and change them and customize them yourself by clicking that manual mode on. So
awesome. No, that's helpful. I definitely didn't know about that. So yeah, let's jump on to the next building.
Let's go ahead. So let's start with step 1 here. This is what you'll see when you first pull up the app. So a lot of data here. You guys mentioned it. There is an advantage to signing up directly with SaberSim through TrueDFS, is that you'll get information automatically uploaded into your app here. So you can see we've got a column here for SaberSim's projected points. We've also got the TrueDFS projections. And you'll also get things like Bobby's cores automatically loaded into your app. So you can see the core plays that might be showing up in the articles or whatever are already loaded up here into the app. You can change your projection source that you're using here. Right now it's set to SaberSim by default. You can change to the TrueDFS projections. You can also select average projections and take an average of the two, which is a pretty cool way to go about doing this here. As we kind of scroll along here and move along, you'll see things like percentiles, right? So the 75th percentile is the fantasy point that in the simulations, the player meets or exceeds 25% of the time or less. And we've also got, or 25% of the time exactly in that particular case. And we've also got things like detailed stat projections and things like this over on the right. The important thing to note is that these all come directly from the simulations. This is the average outcomes for like home runs, stolen bases for pitchers, strikeouts, and innings pitched and things like that all come directly from our simulations. If you've partnered with SaberSim via TrueDFS, this is very simplified for you. I don't think there's actually a lot on step 1 that you really need to do beyond going in, studying the cores here, and switching your projections over to TrueDFS to take advantage here of step 1. So.
Hey, Jordan, I kind of see where we're headed here. So what we're going to be getting, if we continue down this road, is you're going to get a lot of kind of questions that are coming up here that are probably best served for some type of office hours type thing. You know, like Clay's question here is, listen, it's very relevant. But what I think that we should do is have you just kind of go through the whole process of building, and then like afterwards, people can chime in, because I like Rhodey's question is one that we'll get every day, and I know the answer already. Okay. Yeah. But because I've heard it explained so many times. So why don't you just go through, Jordan, the whole lineup build process, and then see if there's questions after that can get in there.
Absolutely. That sounds great to me. So let's move on here and jump into the second step of the process, step 2 here. So again, we call this step 2, select your contest. And I'll talk a little bit about what different settings here do. But the most important thing you can do here in the process is to just specify what contest you are building your lineups for. And I've got manual mode on so you can see what's going on behind the scenes here. I'll explain what each of these 3 sliders do. But I think one of the coolest things just generally about SaberSim overall is that we have an understanding that different contests have different dynamics. There's a different, based on the payout structure of that contest, the total number of people in the contest, the strategies change, how much you want to take into account ownership and variance and correlation into these different contests is important. And we take that into account here by changing the contest specifics up here. You'll get different sliders down here. So
that's really awesome. Do you mind if I just speak to that for 1 second? Because we get a lot of people asking me about this stuff all the time. And the size of, everybody talks about projected ownership and all this stuff like that, but that's just a general raw number that they're basically using an average. You know, I know what certain other sites do, that they'll use like an average of like the average buy-in on the site for the day kind of thing. This is a really, really cool thing because you got a guy like the other night, it was a good example with a guy like Luzardo, who was 3% owned in the, I believe in the lottery, the $15, and like 1% owned in the $4. And then he was 15% owned in the 888. Then he goes down to 3%, then 1%. So it is different when you play at each level, and even in terms of size of tournament, size of fields. That's really important to remember when you're playing these tournaments. So I just wanted to echo that.
Well, let me just, I don't want to say correct you, Bobby, but let me just clarify something. That the ownerships that are displayed are not slate specific. But what Jordan is kind of getting at is when you select like a field size, you know, I say automatically in the wrong way. It knows to construct lineups with that size in mind. Like it'll more. I'll let them continue, but it'll be more likely to grab the 2% guy than the 10% guy, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep. Yeah. I wasn't trying to say that it changes the ownership. I'm just saying that the field size and tournament size really do matter. Maybe it was not a great example on my part.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I mean, kind of a sneak peek here too, that at the moment, these ownership projections that show up on SaberSim here, we do project this in general, kind of thinking about a larger field GPP. We are planning on adding in the somewhat near future contest specific ownership. So you would be able to see, you know, here's what we project for the high stakes single entry stuff. Here's what we project for the low stakes large field stuff. But for the moment, the ownership projections are just kind of simulated for a larger field GDP. But the sliders then do, adjust to what we feel is the optimal strategy for weighting these different factors for different contest sizes. And I do want to talk a little bit about what each of these things do. But first, I'll just mention that we've come to our default sliders, is what we call them, what you see as the default options when you pick a certain contest. These are data-driven and back-tested decisions on our end. So we're not kind of just eyeball testing it and throwing a dart and thinking, yeah, that's probably about where it goes. We've actually built thousands of lineups here at every combination of slider settings and determine what deliver the highest actual scoring, the actual highest value lineups for those particular contests by backtesting and comparing to past contests that actually ran here. So we feel relatively confident about overall where these default sliders are set. So I do want to talk a little bit about what each of these are, because I think it helps explain what's going on behind the scenes quite a bit. And I'm going to actually start bottom to top, because I want to start with the sim variance slider, which I think alone is probably the coolest and most important part about the SaberSim process. What sim variance does is it controls how many simulations we are looking at when we build each individual lineup. So I mentioned before, we have play-by-play simulations, thousands of them for every single game on the slate. And what sim variance is going to do is it is going to bucket, it is going to take a random sample of those game simulations and use the projections that those players scored in that set of sims to build that particular lineup. Ultimately, what variance does, what the sim variance slider does, is it replaces something like randomness, if you're used to a traditional optimizer, by instead of just assuming every player has a normal distribution outcome around their average projection, we actually take the real possible outcomes that they can score based on our sims and use that as our sample for each individual lineup. It ultimately, the bigger this slider gets, the more diversified, the higher upside, and the more volatile your lineups are going to be by taking advantage of the real possible outcomes that can happen in the game. There's obviously a balance here. The reason this is not just set at 10 for every single sport is because you don't need to score 250 points in a contest where 190 would have done the trick. So there's a balance between using more simulations and less simulations. But this slider alone ultimately is going to control a lot of the diversity of your lineups overall. And it's probably the most important thing, I think, to kind of grasp as you're getting familiar with SaberSim. So before I move on to ownership and correlation, any questions or any thoughts on the sim variance slider and the way that we kind of actually use the sims in the lineups?
No, I think it's really, really awesome. A couple people I know who have used it were totally blown away by it because any other builder they had, they didn't have a way of doing this. I think this is really, really, really awesome.
Cool.
I don't have a whole lot of questions on it, but I really like it.
Just cool. As a matter of nomenclature, Jordan, has this replaced the old term smart diversity forever?
It has, and to be honest, it may change again. We want this. It takes a bit to explain what's going on here. Here, and we are trying to come up with the best naming for this so that it is as descriptive as possible. But yeah, it replaced smart diversity for people that are more familiar with SaberSim. So
okay. Yeah, one quick thing before we jump on. We did get a question from Adam. He said, "Thanks for doing this, guys." Something that comes up a lot regarding these sliders is how much to adjust them when you're using your own projections, i.e., if your own projection is more accurate, you should boost the slider.
Yeah, good question. So in general, I would very highly recommend leaving most of the sliders alone. There are really good opportunities to add value into the SaberSim process. One of them is making adjustments to the projections, like you said here. Another, as we'll see here in just a moment, is making adjustments on step 3 after your lineups are built. Tweaking the sliders is not a very high value add part of the process just because of how much work we've put into backtesting them. I would recommend, I would not argue anybody against making adjustments if you have your own process that works for you. But I wouldn't go to the sliders first as a place to make adjustments, if that makes sense. So
makes sense.
Real quickly here, I'll talk about what the ownership fade and the correlation sliders do, and then we'll kind of move on to, I think, the most exciting part of the process, which is step 3. The ownership fade slider, the higher this slider goes, the more we are going to favor lower owned plays, the more we are going to fade higher owned plays. So again, something that is dynamic and adjusts for the contest, right? Where you need to fade ownership a little more aggressively in the large field 150 max stuff, not so much in the small field single entries. Correlation, this for baseball is generally going to be pretty high. The biggest factor that will adjust this is the size of the slate. So you'll see this come down a little bit on smaller slates. You'll see this go up on larger slates. But this basically takes into account how much do we want to value those correlations that we were just looking at before when we had Mike Trout's distributions up. And this slider, I think one of the cool things here that comes into play is this slider will ultimately be what allows you to build stacks without having to set any rules. And it'll build you stacks that are appropriate for the contest and the size of the slate without having to go in and stack different teams up and set different rules for that. So I'm going to go ahead and get a build started here so that we can start messing around with step 3.
Before you go on, I should add that there are a couple of default settings that do change based on contest. And one of the things that was unclicked at step 1, or actually step a half, I guess, for baseball was allow opposing pitchers, right? Mm-hmm. So if you have a full slate, this is always going to be defaulted to not allow them. But once you get, I think, to 2 games, I'm not sure, but I think it's 3 games. But yeah, 3 games, then that by default, I think, goes to allow the batters. So that's something to keep in mind. And then also some of the others, I don't know if the min salary changes depending on contest size as well. But that's that. But again, like those are again, you should know what your defaults are, before you let it run.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that batters against opposing pitcher will come on at 3 games here. That's just our default setting there. I think min salary will generally stay about where it is by default. I think on smaller slates we might allow for somewhat lower salary builds to start coming in a big 11-game slate like we have here for tonight. I think by default, the higher value there. But
okay,
cool. Yeah. So I wanted to kind of let's jump ahead here and talk about what's going on in step 3. So another very unique to SaberSim thing here. We're building for a 20 max. We're building 20 lineups, but we actually went ahead and built this big pool of 500 lineups to back it up. And the reason merely that we do that is so that you can make dynamic adjustments to your lineups and to your different exposures and things like that here, all in step 3, without having to go all the way back to the beginning and start over and adjust all your player exposures. So what that actually looks like here, I'll go ahead and jump over to the stacks tab just to show this in practice as an opportunity also to show as well. We didn't set a single stack rule. All we did was use default settings. And what are we getting here? We're getting 5-3, 4-3, 5-2s, 4-2s, those nice big stacks that you typically want to see in a larger baseball slate. We do have we have 2 stacked lineups here, which perhaps maybe you say, I don't really want to play that kind of lineup construction. You can go over to your max.
I do. I'm always preaching for the 3-3-2s and the 4-2-1-1s. Sorry,
okay. No, that's perfect then. We'll leave it. No, and I do too, actually. So I should actually specify there as well that, I think the conventional wisdom around stacking in baseball, the cart is kind of before the horse now at this point, where you need to tell a traditional optimizer exactly what kind of stack to build, or it doesn't know what to do. So we have this rule where people are like, oh, you want to build 5 stacks in baseball. That isn't because that's actually the optimal strategy. It's because that's what you have to do to get a traditional optimizer to build good baseball lineups. So I'm actually totally with you. I'm fine with a 3-3-2. Mm-hmm. And in fact, SaberSim is telling us that that's at least in 10% of your lineups in optimal strategy for this slate, for this contest, because it was the same correlation factor that built these 3-3-2s as built the 5-3s. Right. So I agree. So actually, for the purpose of that, let's go ahead and leave that alone, and I'll demonstrate the exposures here from a different standpoint. So, I mean, interesting example here right off the bat. Quite a bit of exposure to 9-hole catcher for Toronto. Only in 40% of our lineups, not out of control here, but maybe a little bit too leveraged on a 2% play for us. We can come over here and hit our max exposure and say we only want 20% maximum exposure to Zach Collins. And that will do a couple things. Primarily, that'll go through our pool of 500 after this loads. It will take a second here, I guess. It will go through our pool of 500 and find the best 20, where Zach Collins is only rostered in 20% of the lineups. But second, and I apologize, I think my computer's having a little bit of slowness here. But second, because all these lineups have already been built taking into account correlation, that's not just going to disappear Zach Collins from 20% of our lineups. That's going to kind of calibrate and bring in new, well-correlated lineups, probably naturally decreasing our exposure to Jays stacks, it looked like, by default. So we see it now updated here, resorted, and we're just pulling through our pool of 500 to find our best 20. So step 3 can be a really, really powerful tool to make adjustments and do some fine-tuning without feeling you have to go through and start over from scratch when you didn't get the exposures you wanted.
Like, so for those of you that watch me do this, when I do my live streams, every once in a while, when I have all my lineups built, I will even go through my, where it has a list of players, whatever, tab players, and I'll just, like, sometimes in the NBA, I'll just say, I don't feel like playing X, and I will literally uncheck him from the left side, and like magic, all the lineups recalibrate to come up with other lineups that fit the same types of things that you're looking for. But I just don't feel like playing Andre Iguodala, for example, and for whatever reason, I don't care. Remember, the computer's not going to yell at me. Well, actually, we'll get to that later. It will come to a point where it will yell at you, but that's a little down the road. Yeah. But remember, it's just it's just doing what you tell it to do. So if you tell it not to play any Andre Iguodala, but still do everything else like it's supposed to, just unclick Andre Iguodala, and then it'll just do all the same cool, smart stuff, but just with outside of Andre Iguodala.
Absolutely.
Here's a question that I have that I'm sure you're going to get to, and this is what's going to drive all of you to the lunatic asylum. So you'll see that it lists the lineups there, and it lists them, 1 to 20. Tell them the 2 different ways that it can list the lineups: Saber score or projected score, because those are 2 totally different things, and will invariably come up with 20 totally different lineups.
Absolutely. Yep. Great point. So let's talk about projected score, I think, first, because I think that's what people are probably familiar with. This sort is going to do what a traditional optimizer does. It's going to take all of these lineups here that you've built and just sort them by the highest average projected lineups, right? And we've just discussed why average projections are dangerous for individual players. They don't help predict upside. They don't tell you what the actual highest percent scoring lineups are. They don't take into account correlations, ownership, all of that kind of thing. So even if you've managed to get a traditional optimizer all rigged up with the rules it would take to think about all of these things, at the end, all it's going to do is tell you, hey, these are the highest average projected lineup you can build with these rules. SaberScore is our calculation basically to counter that and improve upon that. And what SaberScore does is it takes the projected score, but it makes an adjustment to every single lineup based on how well that lineup correlates and how well that lineup also navigates ownership based on the sliders that you had set in step 2. So overall, what SaberScore ends up doing is we'll basically judge not only how well each lineup does on average, but also how well it correlates and how well the ownership works out in that particular lineup as well. So let's look at this again here real quickly, just so I can show this one more time. This is sorting by SaberScore. We can see these nice big stacks here. If we flip back over to projected score, we'll just take a look of what this actually does on just our stacks alone. If we sort by projected score, we'll just take a second to update here. But it's a really powerful tool, and it's a really good answer to the problem of average projected lineups being the arbiter of what the best lineups are. So still actually getting some pretty good stacks when we sort by projected score. That's because every lineup in the pool of 500 was built to be optimized for these contests, but you do see we start to get some of these smaller stack sizes kind of start to show up here. So this actually, I didn't expect this to work out as well as it did. You will see generally a lot of times if you sort by projected score, you can get a lot worse looking stacks. This actually did okay here. But for baseball, I always recommend sticking to that SaberScore sort there.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's helpful.
So to answer, so this is a good time probably to answer Rhodey's question, which literally everybody asks, whether you upload your own projections, whether you use TrueDFS projections or whatever it is. So if you do not use SaberSim projections and you replace it with any other projections, how does that impact the way the simulator works in this step 2 when you're building your lineups?
Yeah, let's talk about that here. Let me go ahead and get a player's range of outcomes pulled back up because it'll help me illustrate this here. So if we pull up Rodon's distributions here for tonight. So we have some SaberSim average projection for what we expect Rodon to do on the slate tonight. It's 21.61 points. The TrueDFS projection that we're using, 20.77, or even a custom projection that you came in and put here. Maybe you put him at 19.61. What we do with that is we take the difference of the projection that you have, the custom projection and the original SaberSim projection, and we adjust that player's outcome in every simulation we have for that game by the same difference. So in this case, we're taking every single individual game sim we have for Rodon and subtracting 2 points for it. From what that means is that you still get to take advantage of all of the lovely things about these simulations, like the distributions, like the correlations. All of this still gets pulled in automatically in your lineup building process. We've just made an adjustment of the entire distribution itself. So a very common question, at least as the way it is kind of posed to me on my streams often, is, am I lowering the value of the sims, or am I ruining the sims by making custom projections or using a different set of projections, the TrueDFS projections or the averages or anything like that? The answer is a resounding no. You still get to take advantage of all of that great stuff with the sims. We just slightly adjust it here or there based on where your custom projection's at.
So Bobby, what's cool is, and guys, and I don't know, and Mark, what's cool about this is, okay, so you've told it to do something and it creates all these lineups for you. And that's, I guess, what they call step 2. And step 3 is when you can either really just make it work or really just blow it apart. Like depending on how stubborn you are, depending on how smart you are or how dumb you are. And sometimes being too smart is being too dumb. And when you make those adjustments after the fact, after the lineups, when you say, I don't want to play this guy, this is when you're just, I don't want to say asking for trouble, but it's when you are putting your own, flavor on the lineups, and sometimes, you knowing baseball and knowing basketball, it's worth doing that sometimes. And you guys will all see this from time to time. Sometimes SaberSim will just throw up some weirdness, you'll get some relief pitcher that just by accident will like show up, in sometimes like sometimes you'll get like 2 centers in the same lineup from the same team, whatever it is. And you might think that, boy, that just can't be right or something like that. So the more you know about a sport, the more likely you are to kind of mess around with it, And remember, all this is not a human being. It's a smart little tool that will react based on what you do to it. You know what I mean? So I know people sometimes say, well, what adjustments do you make? When you do something, whatever. Quite honestly, the less I know about a sport, the less adjustments I'll make. I probably, as a lot of my success in other sports have indicated, probably better off like making the lesser amount of adjustments as possible. But so what happens is, and I don't know if you're going to be able to break it right on command, Jordan, but what you end up doing, and this happens a lot, is you build lineups and you build them with this certain expectation of what's going to happen. You're going to say, okay, I'm going to get like a whole bunch of Dodgers, or I'm going to get a whole bunch of this, and you're not going to get it. Okay, you're going to get like 2% of something. Like, well, I'm not doing this. I'm going to have max 30% of this, and then you won't like that. And you're like, you know what? It's not quite where I want it to be. I got to make it less 20%. And after a while, right? Remember, what did we do? We had to build 500 lineups of your, and select 20. Eventually, you're going to disagree with the results so much that SaberSim is going to yell at you. Okay, it's going to put up a little note that says, for us to do what you want to do, we've got to build more lineups even. And what that's really saying is, that like the thing you get, like the warning you get, is, are you sure you want to do this? You know what I mean? I mean, it'll let you, because listen, you're a grown man. You tell it to do something, it'll figure out a way to let you do it. But it does actually, in its own way, just kind of yell at you by saying, listen, we've even built you 500 lineups for the 20 that you want, and you're tweaking with the results so much, we can't even find them in the 500 lineups. Maybe, just maybe, you shouldn't be arguing with us that much.
And that is very well said. And I'm trying to break it here on screen here. And on baseball in particular, it's pretty flexible, but I got it to come up here at the bottom. So it'll say we need to expand the lineup pool to match your exposures and continue building. And I agree. The way I typically recommend thinking about this is, man, if I can't find 20 lineups in my pool of 500, maybe I should back up here and rethink what I'm doing. You could even come back and build a bigger pool of 1,500 and then see if the builder can get your 20 out of a pool of 1,500. But it's generally a pretty good flag overall that maybe you've done a little bit too much. A couple other things that you mentioned there that I just love. The first is that I definitely recommend thinking about your pool of 500 as viable for the contest, and then treating Saber Score kind of as a tiebreaker. So a lot of times I'll get questions here, and I apologize. I think my computer's a little bit locked up on me, but it should reload here in a moment. But a lot of times I'll get questions like, should I just build and take the top 20 lineups I get right out of my pool and do nothing because Saber Score is telling me to? If there is value that you think that you can add by managing your risk and adjusting your exposures down, or making a strategic decision on which teams you want to be over or under on, absolutely, please do it. Then once you've left all the value you can by making adjustments here on step 3, then allow SaberScore to help say, these are the best 20 given the parameters you've given us to use. The one other thing I wanted to mention here too that you had touched on is that because of the way that we're building these lineups and taking into account the things that are important for the sport and the slate and the contest, you can basically allow SaberSim to get you very far along the process. If you don't know anything about the sport or you're very new to the sport, it's going to build you very good lineups by default. If you're an MLB DFS expert and have been playing the sport for years and know a bunch of ways to get leverage and make strong strategic decisions, then SaberSim is going to automate the lineup construction part of it for you and make sure you have good lineups and unlocking you to spend more time on strategizing for the slate. So either way, whether you're a beginner or an expert in the sport, this is going to save you a bunch of time that you would have been spending to program an optimizer to do all the things that a computer can just do better anyway. So wanted to just touch on that. I think those were some really good points you made. And yeah.
I want to ask a quick question just to all you guys, because I rarely script. I'll do it usually more in NFL than I will anything else. I'll do it in baseball as the season goes on. I usually wait a few weeks before I start doing stuff like that. But what kind of rules are you setting? We'll start with Eric and then go to Jordan and Mark, because it's different perspectives on each one of you guys. But I'm curious what kind of rules and what kind of things you're setting. Are you using them in max exposures? Are you?
This is the way I view. Okay, and everybody be different. Okay.
Yeah.
So remember the concept. The concept of using SaberSim is that it takes the rules that based on its back testing that you would want to put in, and puts them in already, okay? And with respect to what lineups it creates, it'll throw out the best ranked by SaberScore lineups, okay? So when it comes to setting min exposures, max exposures, rules, don't play this guy with this guy, don't play with this guy with this guy, I make 0, okay? I make 0 additional rules. I rely on the back-tested work that's inherent in the algorithm, to use a probably the wrong word, but inherent in the system to just trust that that's being done in the efficient way. I've heard, now people can chime in, but I've heard people use SaberSim differently. I've heard people just, like, somebody asked a question, how do I get only 15% of this guy from SaberSim? How do you get only 25% of this guy in SaberSim? And I know what you guys are probably going through in SaberSim. You're like, really? You guys really want us? Fine, we'll let you make freaking groups. You really want to make groups, even though we're doing it for you? Fine. You want to get? We'll do it. You want to limit your exposure? Fine, we'll let you do. If you really want to do that, fine. But for me, if I am using this process, and look, I'll be confident in my projections. I'll put them up there, and if I get 72% of some guy whose name I can't pronounce, I'm going to use them. Okay, and I'm not going to mess with any of the rules. I'm not going to mess with anything. But that's just me.
So let's just say somebody else who followed me and whatever liked me, or if it was just me. I want to use my core plays. I want 35 to 45% of each of those guys. That would I get anywhere resembling that number if I ran it the way that you're talking about? Just sort of straight up, just trying to make sure I had minimum 35% of each of my guys.
You might. I think some of that is going to depend on how well. So it depends on how well some of these core plays are projected. So, I mean, one of the things that's nice here, again, is I can go in and see, I can pull up your full core here and sort by that core and see what exposures we're getting to in our pool here. There's a lot of guys in the core. We only have 20 lineups here, but I mean, you can tell that the builder's definitely prioritizing some of these plays here right off the bat. I mean, if you wanted to get more exposure to some of these guys, it's really great opportunity to go in and just bump that up. I suspect that we have some Yankee stacks in this pool here that by setting an exposure of 10% or so in 20 lineups to judge, that will probably get some of these lineups popping up here. So I think that's a great way to use it. Overall, like I am kind of in line with what Sheets was saying here. I don't typically make a lot of adjustments overall. I think one of the best adjustments I can recommend people to do, especially when they're first getting familiar, is to make sure that your exposures to different players is in line with your own personal risk tolerance for the slate. You're going to have a certain amount of exposure to each player you have here based on, again, the sport, the slate, and the contest you tell us you're building for. And you'll get a good baseline of what we think is appropriate. Baseball's a high variance game. We got 20 lineups. We don't have anybody over 50% exposed right now. But this may be too much exposure for certain players for you, or this may not be enough. You may want to be a little bit more risky, and making adjustments there in step 3, I think, is probably the highest value add as you're first getting familiar. Again, just because the pool of lineups is already viable for the contest.
Well,
there's very risk that you make a mistake here.
Yeah, well, I know. I think what Bobby's asking, Bobby, to answer your question is, yeah, you could totally make sure that you get what you want. In other words, you build like 500 lineups here, or however much you're building, and you choose 20. If you want to make sure that you get like 20% of each of your core, you could just go over on the right there and just put it in.
And it'll
those guys.
Yeah. And I know that sort of. I'm just sort of thinking of the people out there who are trying to figure out exactly what they're differentiating with.
If I could jump in, I'd like to comment on 2 different perspectives. One is an IT professional, the other is a new DFS player. So what I would say is SaberSim, from what I've seen from a software package standpoint, the tool has all the features Jordan talked about. If you're someone that wants to be loyal to TrueDFS and purchase SaberSim because you like our company, right, and want to participate with us, you can still use SaberSim like the old-fashioned optimizers that are out of date in the rest of the industry. You can build your rules. You can lock your exposures up front. That question that C. Davis had about how do I get 25 and 15? On the opening page, just lock that you don't want more than 25% on any player. That'll do exactly what RotoGrinders, Lineup HQ, exactly what Fantasy Cruncher are doing for you. But you're really throwing out the power of SaberSim. That's what I tell you from an IT perspective, okay? But it's there because they want to be a software provider in a parity-rich environment. They have to offer features that allow them to be on par with other software vendors. I do this all the time in my day job. Now, as a new player, what I will tell you is SaberSim provides training wheels for me that protect me from myself. So my current process is a combination of SaberSim and TrueDFS. I start out by doing my builds using the correlations and all the sliders exactly where they are. I don't mess with them. I know that gets me a general guidance. Now I go attend the Live Before Lock with Bobby and Eric. And Bobby, who knows a lot more about sports than I do and can quote statistics about how likely an NBA game is to go into overtime that I can't even pull out of my ass. He knows it off the top of his head. When he says something like that in a stream, and he says, I think these games, are likely to have a better chance to score more runs than it was predicted. I go back and I look at some of my players and I try to take a little more of some of those players or those teams that the professionals are telling me are likely to do a little better than average or a little better than SaberSim.
Well, Mark, excuse me. You see this all the time. This is my process. Especially with basketball, I mean, I will have all my SaberSim builds already done, and then we will go live before lock, and I will just, hey, Bobby, what do you think about this guy? What do you think about this guy?
Right.
And whenever Bobby says, why are we playing him? Yeah, good idea. X. You know what I mean? It's just X. I'll have them all up there, and SaberSim will immediately recalibrate everything. And
I do the same thing.
It exactly by the numbers? No, but who cares? I mean, Bobby, I'll take Bobby's opinion on Andre Iguodala over anybody's.
Here's the thing.
Andre Iguodala, but
if you don't bring any of your own knowledge to the table, then you're playing by formula, right? Like you have to have a reason for playing the players you play. And I say that all the time to people. I'm trying to get some of my friends in DFS. I'm like, you play whoever you want. Like play whoever you want. That's why you get to pick the players. We will tell you if the statistics will tell you if it's a good play. Bobby will tell you what he knows about the sport, right? But if you just have a hunch, again, I don't play this way. I don't play on I have a hunch. But if you have a hunch, go ahead and add 10% of that guy to your lineup, right? Feel free to do that. But Bobby's cores being there is another thing I do. The filter you just did, Jordan, where you were like filtering by exposure and then glancing over at Bobby's core. That's another thing I do every night. I look at my core builds, and then I go look at who Bobby, Rody, and Sheets have put in their core plays. And if I'm getting 0 of somebody, I ask a question in live before lock. I'm like, okay, tell me why I'm not playing Aaron Judge and why you want to play 80% of them, Bobby. And he'll be like, here's why.
Sometimes I run my SaberSim builds, and my first question in live before live, say, okay, Bobby, here's the question: who is Theo Lindy III? Right? Because I'm getting like 70% of it. I literally have never heard of him in my life, and so that's how I kind of start. So wait, so Jordan, all right, so let's move. So we have the lineup set up. How do you what do you do with this now? Like how do you upload? I mean, let's say we've gone through it, we like it. This is what we're going to live with. Then what are the functionalities with uploading, with changing, and stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to adjust this here to a 150 lineup set because I think I'm entered into 150 here tonight. So another cool thing, and I think I should just take the opportunity to mention it here. If you build, if you were building a set of lineups, you said, oh, I accidentally built 20 and I actually really need 50 in this particular set. You can go ahead here and adjust that, change this number up here, and now you've got a set of 150 lineups. So
yeah, but now you got 150 out of only a pool of 500, right?
Yeah, that's not ideal. If you really truly wanted to build 150, it would be the responsible thing would be to go back, start over, and build your 150 with a pool of 1,500. But just for the example here, I think it works okay.
Remind me again how big the pool size goes up to.
It goes up to 500 max.
That's what I thought. Okay.
And I would say that in general, I think 500 will do you okay until you get to the 150 maxes. If you're playing 150, I would highly recommend making your pool size 1,500. That'll basically just mean you have a lot more lineups to work with as you set exposures and things in here in step 3.
Right. Gotcha.
So I've got 150 here. I'm ready to get my lineups into my content here. We have a really cool tool. It's called our entry editor that helps automate this for us. So if you click the entries tab, it'll take you over to this screen here. And we can just one-click download the entries file for tonight's slate, provided you're already reserved into your contest. So I'll click download template file from DraftKings. It goes to DK and it just pulls in my entries file, and I can literally just drag and drop it here into the app. It takes a second here just to load, and then we'll go ahead and we'll have those entries available to us here, and we can just load in our entries here for the slate. So I really highly recommend using this tool every single time you're playing. If you've ever transposed your CSV by one line and screwed up your entire slate, this will save that headache. I think everybody that's been playing DFS for some time has done that at some point. Mm-hmm. All I'm going to do, fill contest with lineups here. And basically it's going to say, what lineups do you want to use to put into these entries, and what fill method do you want to use to do it? So I'll kind of quickly explain what each of these do here. There are, for this section of the app, a lot of tooltips as well, videos and text tooltips that'll help explain what's going on here. But rank, top overall lineup is going to go as the first lineup into every contest. Then the second overall lineup is going to go into every single contest. The third, and so on. It also ultimately has the effect of basically doubling down on your highest Saber score lineups. Mm-hmm. jump to unique random because I think that's the easiest one to explain next. That will just be a random lineup from your pool will go into every single contest. So in this case, this is a 150 lineup set. For this set of contests, if I were to unique random fill it, the mini max would get all 150. Each pool of 20 would just get a random set of 20 lineups from the 150 here. Unique rank, the way this works here, is it will fill them by rank of the way that the contests are actually sorted, but it'll do so in a way that is unique. So if we were to use a unique rank fill with a 150 lineup set, what would actually happen here is the 20 lineups, the first one here would get the first 20, then this would get the next 130, and then we would duplicate the final 20 here in the fourth contest, or the third contest, I'm sorry. But all you need to do is click lineup set, click the fill method, click apply, and then your entries file will get populated here. I really apologize. I'm clearly having some computer issues here today. Once your entries are loaded here, we'll see all of our exposures go ahead and fill in, and we can just click again, one click to download your entries file and open DraftKings, which will do exactly as it says. Open my DraftKings account right to the right page where I go to upload, download my entries file to my account or to my computer, and I can just upload. And it's time that I do this anyway with reserved entries. Oh, hold on. I don't get downloaded.
Well, no worries.
Yeah. I'm really sorry. I'm like locking up pretty hard on my computer here. Everything's kind of slowed, so I apologize.
That's all right, Jordan. While you're doing that, I would point out, because you talked about some of the CSV and other older methods of doing upload. So as someone newer, this is the only method I know how to upload large batches of lineups, and it's super simple, right? There's no point in dealing with anything else. I know some people create a lineup, then they clone that lineup to reserve 500 places in FanDuel or DK contests. I just use the reserve 20 spots button on a FanDuel contest and then come here and do all this in 2 button clicks.
Yeah. And then I just wanted to throw out one thing that's because it was a comment that was made by a couple people in chat here by Joanne saying that you're not going to win every night. Like, that's one thing I try to get into everybody's head when they're doing this. And it's hard for me sometimes as a person who's hand creating to sometimes veer away from some of the really chalky spots, because you kind of want to look, the team's got a 7-run total. Nobody else has a 5-run total. It's hard not to be interested. But you guys are going to try and account for that. But the goal is not to win every single night when you're playing tournaments. The goal is to win more money than you lose in the long run. And I try to tell this to everybody. You might have one winning night a week, and that might double what you ended up losing the rest of the week. Well, that's the way these things work.
When we're talking about the entry editor, we could do this maybe when in a follow-up or whatever. But one thing that's really, really neat is okay. So let's say that these lineups were already made, and you wanted to change them. Yeah. Whether it was before the slate started or after the slate started, you can actually use the late swap tool. That kind of cheat. I use the late swap tool even before, even though it's not technically late. It's later than you made them the first time. Okay. What's really, really cool if you wanted to do that is, so I can't really read too well. Okay, so you have 3 like different contests up here on the right. I don't know which ones they are, but I'm going to presume for the sake of argument that they're sort of different. Okay. Let's presume the one in the middle, the 150 entry max, is a real, 70,000 person tournament. Now let's just say the one on the top is what is more of a single entry, and one on the bottom is more of something else. If you want if you want to change your builds, you want to do whatever, you can choose which of those contests to screw with. In other words, and remember that for each contest, it's a different type of slider, right? It's a different type of build that you want to make for those contests anyway. So when you want a late swap, this is a really cool thing. You could say, okay, I want a late swap. Look at this. He wants to just do for the middle one. So when you hit swap, you hit late swap, it'll go to those sliders again, and it'll say, okay, is this the type of thing you want to do just for this contest? And then you could change it for that contest. And then you can go back to go out to the top contest and do different sliders.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the swap tools live also in the entry editor. So you can go ahead, exactly as Sheets mentioned here, check or uncheck different contests and swap these differently. One of the things that I think is just really cool for baseball in general, kind of just a pretty basic feature, I think it ends up being really valuable here, is in the late swap menu, you can actually turn this toggle on that says only swap lineups containing out players. I actually like to use that quite a bit for baseball, mostly just because, we've got these West Coast games where maybe the lineups are coming late and the Dodgers have a different catcher than expected. And I don't need to go in and rebuild every lineup I made in all my entire 150 just because the Dodgers have a different catcher. You can go in here, only swap lineups that'll contain out players. In this case, this says late swap 0 lineups because I don't have any out players right now, but maybe it would say late swap 12 lineups, and it'll rebuild only those 12 while also keeping track of correlation and ownership and variance just like we do before the build. This is a really, especially for NBA where late swap is so important.
Yeah, that's huge.
You learn something new every day. I never knew that, and that's awesome.
Yeah, so I love this particular. It's kind of quiet down here, but it's a really useful little toggle, a little feature for baseball in particular. But the late swap at large in general, very, very useful, especially in sports like NBA where the slate's getting turned on its head every hour. So,
yep, absolutely. That's great. I'm trying to understand this. I'm going to show Stephen McAdams' question here real quick. It said, how much do you guys use the different percentile projections? I'm trying to, does anybody else understand exactly what that means?
Yeah, pull that back up, and I will show everybody. I will tell everybody what I look at on this page as he's bringing it up or whatever, even the projection page. I to this date have never looked at any of those percentiles. Just never. It seems to me just kind of like the backstory of the projection. You know what I mean? I don't really need to see the backstory. But go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's well said. The percentiles are essentially kind of a way of visualizing or explaining different breakpoints of the player's range of outcomes. When you can kind of use the 75th percentile to visualize the ceiling for a player, the 25th percentile kind of works a bit of the floor. You can actually change these percentiles in step 3 and say, hey, like SaberSim, resort my lineups, but use the 75th percentile as the average projection. I don't think it's very necessary because we're using the simulations themselves. We're using random groupings of the sims already to build every single lineup. I think it's probably something that I would use a little bit more as just a research tool or almost even like a novelty or a curiosity to see what these lineups look like at different percentiles. But it's not something I use in my process too much.
Gotcha. That's helpful. All right. What was the next step here? I think we've gotten through a lot of good stuff here.
Yeah, I think.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think we've managed to walk through a build in full here. I all the way to loading that entries file, which I did kind of behind the scenes finally get to go through. I was uploading the wrong file. Even into late swap a little bit here. I think we've kind of managed a pretty complete build. So.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Now after the games, so I'm looking at these lineups here, and it says salary, projection, ownership, whatever it is. After the games are over, it'll show the actual results, right?
Yeah, it will. We back up here to yesterday's slate and take a look at what that looks like. So I won't have a lineup build built in here, but we do pull in the actual scores here. Normally takes about 24 hours, but about 24 hours from the time the game actually started, we'll have actual scores in here. So you can come in and do a little bit of research, a little bit of your own back testing. So you can see here this column actual. So this is, of course, the Ohtani chalk busting last night for 1.45 DraftKings points, but all of the other scores that players actually scored from last night and see how it went. So,
yeah. And as Adam was just pointed out, Adam's a great guy and he's always with us, but look, we love that you're in our Discord and we're not steering you away from it, but we also think that there's a lot you could get out of being in the SaberSim Discord as well. And it'll talk about, a lot of sim runs and things like that. So just wanted to tell everybody that because we really do view this as a partnership, and we want you guys to get the best information that you possibly can. And then some of that might not always be in our Discord; it might be in SaberSim's as well.
Well, not only that, not even the Discord. They have this thing that I still can't believe you're still doing it. But every day they do office hours where he takes all these questions that he's heard every single day. And he gives the same answer to the same questions literally every single day. One of these days, it could be an FAQ where you can actually just link people to like your explanation of the question that is coming. But in any case,
that already exists, believe it or not.
Okay.
But yeah.
Yeah. Oh no. Awesome. Anyway, so I didn't know if there were did we make it through the list here?
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I wanted to walk through on my end here. At least as an introduction, there are a lot of ways to continue to add additional value here. There are a lot of different things you can do. I think what we walked through here today is a very good first steps. You're building your first baseball lineups with SaberSim to understand what's going on behind the scenes. I think the plan here is for us to continue to kind of do more of these kinds of streams and open Q&As as people have opportunities to get familiar with it. But that is what I had to walk through here for today, at least.
Awesome. Mark, do you want to just take a quick moment to show the step through process of signing up? I know it's pretty basic to all of us, but just I thought that'd be a good idea just to run through that again. Is there any way you could take over the screen and just talk about where, we said where to find them, but I think it's good to reiterate, like.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely. So we can get to that from the homepage, and then we can show people what we're offering. No problem. So TrueDFS homepage, if you are interested, again, if you're already a member, already have your subscription to SaberSim, you can find SaberSim right here. You can also find them under the tools section. Also, this video that we're recording right now is probably going to go right here, center mass on the homepage. So you'll be able to watch that video, get all this information back. But if you are not a paid subscriber, you can go check out our plans. We have a basic plan that just gives you our TrueDFS core service. That's all of the information from Bobby and Eric and Rody and TrueDFS Chan. If you play the sports that he covers, it's access to our Discord, it's access to our premium Discord, it's all of Sheets' projections, it's all of our premium features, as well as all of our free videos. But if you really want to advance your game, we definitely recommend you move up to, and again, the great place to start is the SaberSim Starter plan. SaberSim Starter allows you to do what you need. Since we're already giving you the projections, you don't have to worry about the fact that Starter under SaberSim, under your normal plan, right, Jordan? You can't upload your own projections to Starter. You have to use, but because you're getting it through us, through the partner, you're getting our projections uploaded anyway. So that's amazing. So the biggest difference then is if you start finding yourself doing more max entry contests, right? If you find yourself generating hundreds of lineups a day because you're playing all of these, nickel and quarter entries, or if you've got a bigger bankroll and you're playing $5 and $10 or the $15 lottery, you're going to need SaberSim Advanced because that's where you can actually start to generate 500 plus lineups at a time. So go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, I have something. You done with this part of it?
Yep.
So I have one more. I have a question, and I want to share my screen for a minute, also, real quick. You with regard to what sports SaberSim supports, it used to be only recently, actually, that there were some sports that you supported, sort of, with Sims versus just other ways, and some you didn't support at all. If I'm not mistaken, if you might have them all the ones you support are now sim based, even including MMA and auto racing now. And I still think there's no support for tennis at all. Why don't you just go over what's supported in what degree and what is not?
Yeah. So we have full support for us is having obviously the slates up available in the app to use, but also full game simulations for those sports. So full support for us: NBA, NHL, MLB, NFL, golf, MMA, NASCAR, Formula One, League of Legends, and Counter-Strike. Those are full simulations, the full capacity of the app you can use for all of those different sports. We have partial support meaning we don't simulate the games, but you can use, I don't know if you guys have projections for these sports. You can use these projections or custom projections of your own for college basketball and football, Call of Duty, which is uploaded in the app, soccer, and as of actually today, USFL. So I know USFL starts this weekend here. We won't have sims for that, but we do have the slates up in the app if you have projections available. I think tennis is kind of the lone ranger of a sport that we actually have zero support for at the moment. It is a priority of us getting those slates up into the app so you can at least kind of start building for tennis with SaberSim. I think that's the one lone sport that's not really supported yet. But long-term, our goal is to, of course, have simulations and full support for every single of these sports. NASCAR, MMA, Formula One, all very new simulations. that we're pretty proud of and have been having some pretty good success with. So if you haven't tried those sports, very good example of, maybe you're a football, basketball, baseball DFS player. You never looked at a NASCAR DFS slate in your life. SaberSim will help you get to a baseline point of successful lineup constructions without having to know a thing. I literally just started playing NASCAR at the start of this year, and I've been profitable this year so far, basically taking advantage of the simulations we have for the sport and doing a little bit of my own research to help kind of bridge the gap. But you can't do that on a traditional tool, especially in a sport like NASCAR. So it can be really helpful for that.
Well, excuse me. So can I share my screen?
Yeah,
Am I allowed?
I think so.
Yeah.
I can't.
Got it? No.
Add source.
Did you do it?
I don't think so. Share screen.
Well,
Okay. So I would have loved to have had this happen, like literally, like during the thing, but literally, can you just got second in an LOL contest? It happened 5 minutes ago while we were doing this. I would have loved.
Of course you did.
I would have loved to have. This guy got me right at the freaking wire. Okay, and to be honest, I couldn't tell you what any of these abbreviations stand for. Okay, these two names. Okay, and you have a combination of having of now having, we have DFS Chan that gives kind of fundamental research on a League of Legends. You pair that with the simulator, and you get a little, listen, you get a little bit of experience, with what types of, because SaberSim can be, I'll tell you, it can be somewhat temperamental sometimes. I mean, I ran like 30 SaberSim lineups for League of Legends yesterday. It gave me 0-4-3s. So sometimes you gotta scold it a little bit. Sometimes you gotta like tell it what to do a little bit. But if you want to, again, play like sports that you don't know too much about, I'm not saying you're going to be like a winner doing it, but it certainly gets you like Mark was saying, get you reasonable, passable lineups that have a shot to win. And I'll tell you, when I first started using SaberSim, and I think I took down a Yahoo like football tournament, NFL tournament, Max said, "Listen, do me a favor, just put that on." Because I'm not much of a screenshot guy, right? But Max, do me a favor, could you just post that on Twitter? I just want people to see that, like, that they could actually build lineups that can win. You know what I mean? But they do. And if I had to give one bit of advice, I always say this is, when you're building lineups using SaberSim, and you get lineups that like you're like, wow, really? Don't worry about it. Okay, like those are, for me, whenever I've hit like the few times I hit like the 100,000, like the big ones, like those were probably the last lineups that I would have put in myself. I mean, really, like never. And I'll give you one more example. Like take MMA, for example. And you guys just started doing simulations for MMA, I guess, recently. And MMA would be like the one sport that I'm like, okay, I'll use SaberSim to build the lineups, but I'm gonna tell it what I want. I'm gonna want 50% of this, 50% of that. Simulate. I don't really care too much about it. And literally just like 2 weeks ago, but I got not say lazy, but I wanted to play 150, so I built like 150 using my projections, but like using this SaberSim simulator. And I get these lines. Well, I don't want to play that guy, but I got lazy. I'll just throw it in there anyway. And I freaking chopped the optimal with literally the one that got there. Never. I could have built 7,000 lineups by hand. I just literally would have never gotten it. So, look, I'm not saying to not give your own opinion, you know what I mean, and not use your own knowledge, but have a little faith. Have a little faith in some of the lineups that you get.
Yeah, what we always like to say is treat SaberSim as an advisor. It is not a like dumb spreadsheet or calculator that you have to fight to get the lineups that you want. It is an advisor to your process. It doesn't mean you need to follow it blindly. It doesn't mean that you should ignore it completely. And I think that's a good way to think about it.
Absolutely.
I think the other analogy Andy's used on stream before is architect, right? SaberSim is the architect of the house. It gets you everything you need to be successful, but you still, as the player, are the interior decorator. You still get to decide what you want your actual lineups to look like, given a core framework of valid winning lineup construction models.
Right. Absolutely. You guys, this is really, really helpful. I think this is really good. Hopefully everybody else out there finds it helpful. And I think that, it's something that we talked about beforehand that maybe we can do or sort of touch base every so often, and then have Jordan back on, because really, really, man, appreciate it. It's really, really helpful to have this. We're really excited about the partnership, and it's very easy to sign up, as Mark just showed you. Guys, if there's anything else, let me know. And if not, we'll get out of here till next time.
Yeah, it was fun. Thanks for having me on. I'm super excited about it.
Awesome. Well, Jordan, you did a great job, man. Really appreciate you walking us through everything. Anybody else with any questions, please put it in our support channel. Or, I mean, look, go on to SS's is Discord or Slack that you guys have over there? Slack.
It's Slack for us.
For SaberSim and our Discord. And fire away any questions, fire away any ideas of things you'd like to see next time, and we'll do our best to accommodate you. For that said, for TrueDFS, for SaberSim, for the SaberSim guys, I'm Bobby with thanks to Eric, Mark, and Jordan, and we will see you guys very shortly. Good luck, everybody.